Hello everyone, I'm afraid it's yet another day in the clown decade. The decade where things are only getting worse before they're getting better. And today, once again, we are going through probably one of my most hated people on the internet, Otto English, as he once again says how the past isn't actually better than the present, and in fact, having any sort of nostalgia for the way things were better in the past is actually a very bad thing, and probably makes you a racist. So getting straight into it, a few days ago, Otto English decided to coin a word, and as is typical with modern day wit and repartee, all he has done is fling a swear word into another word, and that makes his fans clap like seals. So in this tweet, he coins the term shit-stalgia. Noun. The promulgation of context-free images of the past on social media in order to give the impression that the good old days were better. Obviously, the implication here is that the good old days were not better. And you know what, Otto? In some ways they weren't. But in other ways, they were, and we're going to go through this. So, just to quickly go through each image that he is using as his example of bad nostalgia, that I'm going to call it, because I try my hardest not to swear in my videos anymore, partly because I want to be monetized, but also partly because I'm slowly trying to get these videos more professional. The streams are a different matter. The streams I don't mind being vulgar on. But with these videos, I really am trying to make a chronology of present day politics and what people think of them. And so I think the less vulgar they are, the better. I used to have a different outlook, but now obviously I guess you can call it maturity. But as I say, with the Guardian streams and things like that, I don't really care about that. That's a different tone entirely. Anyway, without being distracted anymore, the first image from Culture Critic that I have a love-hate relationship with is showing images from various United States cities from over a century ago, and as you can see, it's grand designs from cities like Chicago, Buffalo, San Francisco, and St. Louis. Snapshots of quite clearly grand designs with beautiful and picturesque streets, and people generally dressed up very smartly. Now, is there any context to these pictures at all? No, but that's not the point he's making. You don't need context to say, look, the past had large-scale designs with people there looking very prim and proper. I like this aesthetic, and I would like to see more of this aesthetic in real life. That is all this is saying, that there was beauty in the past, and much grander beauty too. But anyway, we will wait to get into Otto's argument for this. Moving on to the second picture. Yesterday's Britain saying, just popping into the co-op for a pint of milk and a loaf of bread. Can I get you anything? Hashtag life, hashtag society, hashtag Britain, hashtag flashback. And again, a quick snapshot of, I don't know, 1960s, I'm guessing, possibly 70s street. Again, looking relatively clean, looking better than the average brutalist architecture we see today, and a well-mowed lawn. Again, very simple stuff, pleasant to look at. It really doesn't go that deep. Third image again is from yesterday's Britain, because apparently bad nostalgia is so widespread these days. The sweetest of times, Gloucester in 1967, and all is well in yesterday's Britain, a better Britain. And again, a load of hashtags, and again, small town centre, a few telephone boxes, clean streets, you know, all the standard stuff. Again, all it is a tweet saying, I like this aesthetic and would like to see more of it. It's not very deep. It's not deep at all. And it's surprising that Otto has such a problem with it. And the final picture again from yesterday's Britain, because as I say, this is a very widespread phenomenon. A beautiful time in yesterday's Britain. A better Britain. But nothing good can last forever. And it's a very basic ice cream truck with a bunch of women with their children buying them ice cream, with, again, clean walls, a church in the background, clean streets, etc. Just a nice aesthetic that I too personally like. The implication being, of course, that we don't see this stuff as much as we used to. And a lot of people in Britain would appear to agree. However, as I say, Otto doesn't appear to actually disagree that we don't see this type of aesthetic much anymore. What he appears to say is that actually the past was way worse, and these aesthetics are part of it and need to be gone. In other words, I'm actually quite worried that Otto English is suffering from manic depression and probably needs to see a therapist. Or maybe go to the gym and lift some weights, I'm not sure. Anyway, obviously, as is natural for Otto English's tweets, there are plenty of sycophants there to support his viewpoint that actually Britain was never beautiful in the past. Or at least that the good old days were not better in any way. The first one saying that San Francisco is from the Panama Pacific exhibition. It was never meant to be permanent and was essentially made out of paper mache. It was torn down because it was grossly unsafe, and passed its sell-by date after just a few months, with Otto replying yes, I know, and I think the others are from similar. And because, from my experience with Otto English, I can't trust a damn thing that he says, I decided to look specifically into this Panama Pacific International Exposition, and even just looking at Wikipedia, as far as I can tell, again, Otto English is half right, but giving the absolute worst take possible. The Panama Pacific Exposition was a World's Fair held in San Francisco, California, in 1915. Its stated purpose was to celebrate the completion of the Panama Canal, but it was widely seen in the city as an opportunity to showcase the recovery from the 1906 earthquake. The fair was constructed on a 636-acre site along the northern shore between the Presidio and Fort Mason, now known as Marina District. So yes, apparently this was all constructed as a temporary World's Fair. That is absolutely fine, but this doesn't actually change the context or point of what he was saying. In that, in the past, we can have temporary beauty. In fact, we can have temporary grand beauty. There is a recent statue we had on the 4th plinth. I think his point still stands. Anyway, I think the most interesting part is actually why it was torn down, because from what I can tell, it wasn't just because it was unsafe, though it more than likely was part of the reason, but it seems that it was always meant to come down. Construction from temporary materials, almost all the fair's various buildings and attractions were pulled down in late 1915. Intended to fall into pieces after the close of the fair, so it was meant to all fall down anyway. Reportedly because the architect believed every great city needed ruins, the only presently surviving building on the exposition grounds, Bernard Maybeck's Palace of Fine Arts, remained in place, slowly falling into disrepair. In other words, part of the artwork was to try and make these ground buildings and quickly let them fall to ruin, because effectively these American architects saw ruins all over the world and thought, you know what, our city needs it too. That was part of the art and part of what makes it beautiful. Yet what can all these snivelling leftists say? Oh, they didn't even intend for it to last very long. How can that be considered good? Because it's artwork. It's okay to allow a large portion of your city be dedicated to some sort of artwork, even if it's useful or not. That's generally what gardens are seen as. That's generally what public parks are seen as. Places for natural beauty and even art. And anyway, whether the other 3 pictures were just supposed to be temporary grand designs to fall into disrepair or whether they are still there, I don't know and I don't really care. People like to see good aesthetics. A lot of people are saying they are not seeing these good aesthetics as much as they used to. That is all the point is. You don't need to go into this full frontal attack on them just because you don't like other parts of their politics, Otto. As a grand example is shown here, from an FBP ear, because for some reason that is still a thing even though Brexit was done 8 years ago. The usual thinly veiled message of bad nostalgia images is that everyone in the photo is white. Yup, says Otto English. I mean, ultimately, I think this perspective is actually purely projection. I have no doubts that there are racists who prefer the past. In fact, I would argue that 100% of them do, obviously, due to the mass migration we've seen in the past decade or so. However, what is quite clear from leftists is that they effectively think anything that is majority white or, you know, built by white people or whatever is clearly awful. Hence, Otto English's main target is basically anything European and American. He'd never dream of going after anyone like Ash Sarkar, who practically deifies her own great-auntie, who was a terrorist, and instead for some reason focuses on the fact that Churchill had some quotes misattributed to him. I'd say it's very strange behaviour, but once again, if you just see these people's politics as stemming from envy, it all basically makes sense. Anyway, the final tweet is someone tweeting a propaganda piece. I think this is from the 17th century about the Great Plague at the time, saying, gonna start tweeting stuff like this, with Otto replying, happier times if only we could go back. Which is another very strange thing that these leftists do, including Otto English. Someone will tweet a video or a picture out from, I don't know, 1910s to 1950s, Britain or whatever, and they will just point out a load of policies and phenomena at the time that they don't like. Things like, oh, polio was rife, don't you know? Does this mean you want a load of polio back? And it is one of the strangest arguments I think I've ever heard. Because all people like Culture Critic and like these other accounts who are constantly posting just pure beauty, frankly, from towns, cities, building, architecture of the past that is clearly beautiful and clearly not being made today, is that they simply just want the streets to look better. They want to feel like they are in a piece of art, and they aren't feeling that these days. That does not mean that they then want to regress medicine and technology back along with it. These people were making grand, beautiful designs with really basic labour. We now have incredible cranes, we have incredible technology that should make all of this easier, and for some reason, we're instead making glass monstrosities and brutalist concrete skyscrapers that frankly just look depressing and like we're in the Soviet era at its peak, and people are simply not liking that, Otto. That does not mean we then want polio back as well. Anyway, I think the absolute biggest giveaway that not only is Otto English an idiot, but he is an envious and horrid little snake, comes from a little back and forth he had with an anon account effectively asking, well, what's wrong with saying that things were beautiful and wanting things to be beautiful again? There is nothing wrong with wanting to remember the past, and older people often think their day was better regardless of reality or opinions of others. The fact you see this as some sort of threat is interesting, though, to which Otto replies, if people want to dwell in the past, that's fine. If they want to weaponize it to drag down the present and blockade the future, well, screw them. To which, obviously, I think everyone's question is the same. Blockade the future, what are you on about? Because, yes, there are some Luddites within the sphere of the internet that does say the past is beautiful, but as I say an awful lot of the time, they are few and far between, and a lot of them are looked at with quite big cock eyes, as these people quite a lot of the time also openly talk on the internet about how they basically rely on modern medicine to, keep their brain in check, while at the same time demanding that we go back to tribal medicine or something like that. These people are very strange, but they're also very rare, and people will typically just ignore them anyway. Point being here is that there is absolutely no issue with picking and choosing where we turn time back on. People like their iPhones, they are saying that we can live in a world that is both beautiful aesthetically and also everyone has an iPhone. The aesthetic of Anglo-futurism is typically what we think about when an awful lot of right-wingers are thinking of the future. Effectively, it's if we kept Victorian aesthetics but also had spaceships. It's what I'm writing my book around, by the way, which I really need to write more than one chapter on. Anyway, to absolutely make it clear to Otto and his sycophants, am I expecting the future Britain to look exactly like this picture? No, not necessarily, but my god, it's one hell of an ideal, and one that hopefully you can get behind too. Clean streets, law and order, large, great, and aesthetically pleasing buildings, with a society that simply works. It's absolutely every right-winger's wet dream. It's not my fault if you think that's racist. Anyway, as mentioned, Otto's sycophants were really going off on other people, with one saying, please beware the Twitter account sharing seemingly harmless nostalgia, which are in reality spreading xenophobia and racism. Otto English has dubbed this trend bad nostalgia. Here is a case in Point Sandy of Suffolk, and here she says, let's see your picture of the real England that luckily still exists. I'll go first, Wiltshire. And yep, perfectly reasonable streets with nice looking terrace houses, and even a bit of mock Tudor facade there too. I have seen plenty of villages like this. I really like them. But Sandy was quick to say her thread wasn't intended to be racist, but does that stack up? How? I don't even know how to really reply to that tweet. This happens an awful lot with Otto English's sycophants. Whenever I get into an argument with any of his reply guys, I get the absolute most ridiculous accusations leveled at either me or whoever I'm defending, because I'm just left speechless by how stupid a reach they have made. Someone posted a really nice village with literally no person within the picture, and apparently, yes, people are accusing her of racism. Does it stack up that this thread isn't racist? Yes. There's not even a person in it. Someone replied to Sandy of Suffolk with a beautiful photo of the Shah Jahan Mosque. Take a look at Sandy's reply. So Sandy, Muslims aren't British then. So Frogboy says, the grade 1 listed Shah Jahan Mosque in Woking, Surrey, thought to be the first purpose-built mosque in Northern Europe, to which Sandy replies, lovely architecture but not suited to England. Which, I mean, yes, it's absolutely not what you would not typically associate with English architecture in an English building. I don't really know why the question here would be, oh, are Muslims not British then? It's clearly a distinctly different aesthetic to the classic England that Sandy was asking for. But as I say, this is what Otto and his sycophants do. They find the most milquetoast takes that you can possibly find, and then make the most harsh conclusions you could possibly take from the comments made. Anyway, carrying on, when another account replied with a photo of Brighton Pavilion, Sandy approved. She liked that reply, beginning to look like Sandy is a bit racist now. So apparently no matter what Sandy does, there's always going to be a problem. Both of these buildings are in an Islamic exterior style and aesthetic. Apparently saying I like it but it doesn't belong in England to one is racist, and then just liking another one is racist. But really, these are just outliers. This isn't really the reason that Sandy of Suffolk was brought up, because her real crime was retweeting some tweets from Tommy Robinson. It's a small step from Sandy of Suffolk posting bad nostalgia to her retweeting Stephen Tommy 10 names Robinson, Yaxley Lennon. He's had two names. The known racist, Islamophobic, founder of EDL, and serial criminal. I think it's only really founder of EDL and serial criminal that are correct accusations there. However, this is the whole point. All this person wanted to do is say this person likes Tommy Robinson and that's why they're racist. Every other example was just, I'm going to take the absolute worst conclusion I can take that doesn't even fit. This woman liked two pictures of Islamic style aesthetics that were created in England, but is not suited to the English aesthetic, which is true because it's Islamic aesthetic, not English aesthetic. And if you take from that, does that mean that Muslims can't be English? Yeah, kind of. We're this thing called a Christian nation. Oh, but what about all the atheists? Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, pretty much all of them would say they're quote-unquote culturally Christian. So as far as I'm concerned, they're temporarily embarrassed Christians. Anyway, this thread goes in all different sorts of tangents, accusing other people of being racist. Carl Benjamin is brought up as being a known racist despite being part black. You get the point. I'd rather talk about other things, such as even bringing up the thumbnail from this video. Here is the original picture that I got. I'm pretty sure it's just a picture from a jigsaw. I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't really matter. Point is that this is obviously an idealised, picturesque image of Corfe Castle, which was a castle made by King William the Conqueror, I believe, established sometime between 1066 and 1087. And obviously the village was built up around it, and obviously it all stands to this day. This is a village that is close to a millennia old. And from this picture, it looks absolutely beautiful. And here's the thing. You can still see pictures like this today. Here was a picture taken in the 80s of a similar view, not near the train tracks, but clearly the aesthetic was still there. You can see how the picturesque painting from the jigsaw cover was clearly inspired by real things within this village. In other words, yes, this picture was an idealised portrayal of the village, but it was idealised based on real things. All that's really made up there is that everything in that picture was going on at once, when it was probably several different experiences the artist had, and he decided to put them together. And here's a shot from the castle taken even more recently. Picturesque village, as I can say. You can even see a steam engine on the railroad on the left-hand side there. As I say, whoever this artist was, obviously he put a few different experiences together into one picture, and it's something that an awful lot of people who live in rural areas can say, yeah, I've pretty much seen exactly this. I mean, I think the only real difference here between this and the original picture is that the church has a steeple in the original picture, but it's obviously just a tower here. I don't know if it had a steeple in the past or whatever, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't take away from the fact that the original picturesque scene was real. It is based on a real England, and I don't care how much Otto English and his sycophants try and claim that it never existed. It still exists today. I've been to these places. They are classical tourist destinations. I don't know why he tries so hard to pretend they don't exist. But the thing is that when I say I've been to these places, I'm going to go even closer to home, quite literally, and show you a couple of pictures of the town that my grandmother grew up in and had a huge fondness of, well, because obviously it was her hometown, and one that she obviously would say was remarkably beautiful, and I have to say I agree with her. So on screen now is from one of my grandmother's books that I am using for this video. And this book's pretty good because these are pictures of, obviously the bigger one is of the Victorian era of the market town where my grandmother grew up, and then the smaller picture, as you will see in future pictures as well, is of more recently taken ones when these books were published back in, I think, the 60s or 70s, so that you can see how it was then, how it was now. And I'm going to treat you and show you the same pictures from the same angle from today, thanks to the magic of Google Street View. But already you can probably see what I mean about the aesthetics of the place simply looking better. You've got a lovely building on the right with gas lanterns, which again, I'm not saying go back to gas lanterns. However, you can have street lights that look better than the ones we typically see today, as I'm sure we will see in a second. Here is a similar view from today. As you can see, a lot of the architecture, especially when you look at the higher end of the building, is much similar. You have a bit of a brutalist building on the left-hand side above as the town was expanding upward. Most of the shops are as modern as you'd expect today. However, obviously on the left-hand side you have the Station Hotel, which is a pretty decent pub. Keeping with similar outside Victorian aesthetics, I quite like this. I want to see more of this. This is all people are saying they want Mr. English. However, as you can see on the right, behind the clock tower, is the updated station. It's a Metrolink station as well as a train station now, as is in South Manchester, along with being a bus terminal. And you might not be able to see it properly here, but it is basically just a big glass and concrete monstrosity. That is not in keeping with the type of star we like to see. We just are saying, Otto, that we'd like to see more of the classic aesthetics that we are used to seeing from previous photos. And I will go into another example now. And as you can see, yet more classical Victorian style. 3 stories high buildings, and I'm not expecting Union Jacks to be hung absolutely everywhere. The reason they're hung in this picture is because I believe it's from Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee celebration. And yes, I am sure that all these people have problems that we don't have problems with today. However, I don't see why we can't have a world with all the positives of this again. Because already you can see from the bottom right picture, the Victorian buildings on the left-hand side apparently have all been knocked down to be replaced by mid-60s and 70s architecture that just looks a bit flat and boring. And as you can see from the modern day, they kept that architecture along the bottom side on the left-hand side here. This is the exact same road as before, by the way. This is just a few hundred metres up from the last picture. And as you can see, they added a big monstrosity hotel with brutalist architecture right above the already crass 60s, 70s architecture buildings. Again, Otto, to make it absolutely clear, I want my towns and villages to have a lot more buildings like the one on the right there, rather than the one on the left. And you can't see it, but there's a big hospital building just to the right as well. Again, quite recently built. Again, not quite in the style that I would like to see, but it is brick and mortar with big windows. It's better than what we see in this picture on the left-hand side. Still not perfect, but hey, at least we're getting there. But I think the biggest affront to nature is the main market street. Again, lovely Victorian architecture, lovely shop stalls being put out down this street. Lovely, clean, aesthetically pleasing. You look directly above, these lovely buildings knocked down for flat and boring, monotonous architecture. We like a bit of variety in the buildings. Victorians seem to have that variety in droves, even if it was only subtle. As you can see, great they added a tree to the middle and pedestrianised it, even back in the 60s and 70s, but still, bit of a downgrade when it comes to the architecture and aesthetics. Here's what it looks like today. As you can see, same tree is still there. The architecture, again, above on the right, stuff I quite like. Stuff on the left, they knocked it down to turn it into pretty poor glass monstrosities. And the thing is, the original picture I showed, that was what this whole street originally looked like. And as you can see from the flooring here, complete inconsistency, looks a bit grim and dirty, plenty of closed down shops to let. You go even further down this street, however, and I don't know why they did this, but they decided to only really redevelop one side of the market street into, as I say, glass monstrosities with big old H&Ms, Next, River Islands, Waterstones is there as well. Whereas on the right-hand side, they kept a lot of the 60s, 70s architecture. Not entirely sure what the thought process behind that was, but at least the flooring is a lot more consistent and clean here. I'm not saying it's impossible to make things like this look nice, but please just redevelop the whole thing into one aesthetic. I'd at least take that over the mishmash we're seeing. But in the interest of fairness, there are other areas of this town that still have a gorgeous classic Victorian aesthetic still knocking about. This area was the market. It was redeveloped yet again, as you can tell from the flooring, but did really try and keep the classic aesthetic intact. And so it's perfectly possible to keep this aesthetic intact and use it for other uses. The market hall now is effectively just a massive place to get food, wine, beer. It's basically a massive bar for the middle classes. And it's great. I love it there when I go visit. So when someone like Otto English says, oh, we can't have this without polio, this is living proof that that is not the case. Anyway, I thought I'd give you a little peek into my own view on bad nostalgia, and effectively what I think is that all this bad nostalgia means is that I want to signal to people that if they like the look of something good that was from at least 50 years ago, then that person is an evil racist, because the only reason they think it looks good is because everyone was white in those old pictures. Despite the fact that even from my own Google Street View of these streets, I'm pretty sure there were only white people in those pictures. So does that mean that loving my grandmother's hometown in the current state it's in makes me racist because none of the pictures had black people, Otto? No, obviously not. All this is a tactic to try and completely dismiss other people with something that is completely reasonable. Classic pictures of classic aesthetics make me feel good because it does look good. That makes you an evil racist, and obviously there's the other argument that Otto always brings out, that these places never really existed, despite the fact that we have people still living today that tell us it existed, and we can literally see it existing today in the modern world. So I don't know what the hell he's talking about. I live in a rural area myself. I see pictures like this all the time. You can absolutely keep gorgeous aesthetics in place without having to resort to calling people that want it racist, Otto. It is perfectly possible. I have lived in places myself where this is the case. My grandmother has told me about living in these places herself, and we have photographic evidence of it existing in the past, in the present, and we are obviously going to have it in the future as well, because people like living in beautiful areas. Anyway, that's pretty much all there is to go over in this subject. I'm sure there will be plenty more to have a go at Otto English for in the future, but I just wanted to quickly touch upon bad nostalgia basically not existing. Or at least not existing in the way Otto English says it exists. Obviously, I think the people who unironically want to stop modern farming practices and people that want to take away people's smartphones if they move into a village need to have a smack around the head. Because, as I have quite clearly shown, you can have these aesthetics as well as not having to have polio and not having to take iPhones off everyone. Right. With that, that is everything I had for you today. So, once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.